Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Aaron, this is the 5 red lights, and let's discuss what happened when the 5 red lights went out in Portimao.
1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go!
Welcome back then everybody, and thank you for joining me today. First of all, thank you for getting me to 30 subscribers. I tweeted about 10 days ago now, maybe 2 weeks ago now, to see if we could get to 30 YouTube subscribers before the Portuguese Grand Prix, and we did it. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the channel, and of course to those who helped get me to the magic 30 number. Of course, if you're watching this video, leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Now let's talk about the Portuguese Grand Prix. It was a race that threatened to burst into life on a couple of occasions, but ultimately it became a race of less action than we really hoped. I mean, part of this can be attributed to the hardness of the tyres that were provided by Pirelli, which was a bit of a joke, to be honest, because the soft tyre was lasting far too long. And you know, you saw Perez do more than 2/3, more than 3/4 of the race on his mediums, which shouldn't really be happening. But then also the race had less action because Lewis Hamilton was just so dominant, which we shouldn't disdain on. He's a master of his craft, and we should absolutely celebrate him as such. The midfield, as normal, was quite lively, and those who started outside the top 10 made the most of being outside the top 10 and having freedom of tyre choice to begin with. They started on the mediums and stopped a lot later for their hard tyres. The fortunes of Alonso and Ricciardo against those of Vettel and Sainz, proving that as much. In the end, it was a great win for Lewis Hamilton. It took him to 97 in his career. Second was about as good as Max Verstappen could hope for in the end, and Valtteri Bottas will be very annoyed with third place after pole position on Saturday. Now I'm recording this a couple of hours after the race, and between the race finishing and now, of course, I've thrown the question out to Twitter to see what they made of it. Of course, many people were boycotting social media this weekend. Now, I decided not to because I believe in enacting the change that you want to see. So I believe that we should just be kind, and the way to show people that is for me to do that myself. So I'm going to leave a little hashtag, kind is king, and that's going to be on all of my videos moving forward. So just be kind. That's the best thing you can do. So I threw that question out to Twitter to see what you thought of the race, and here are some of the responses that I got. John T, he gave it 2.5 out of 10, saying it was a great performance from Lewis, but the race was pretty dull. At least the midfield was interesting. And Pits to Podium said the race was passive. Undoubtedly Hamilton won with his masterclass, but it hasn't had anticlimax like Bahrain or dramatism like Imola. It's a subpar race. We will give it 3 out of 10. Now I agree, not the most exciting race in the end. I'd give it 5 out of 10 because there was a short battle at the front, and Hamilton did have to work for it in the early stages, which we'll get onto in a minute. But overall, not a terrible race, but it could have been a bit better. So let's discuss Lewis's perfection in Portimao. So Lewis Hamilton delivers another masterclass to claim victory, but he didn't have it all his own way, of course, because Valtteri Bottas did take the pole position on Saturday, which is yesterday, of course, now. And Bottas led away in the early stages. He led really well. He took the lead at the start, a very good getaway, nailing that start, and he nailed the restart after the safety car for Raikkonen colliding with the back of his own teammate Giovinazzi. He actually managed to wrong foot Lewis, quite impressively actually, at the restart, and it caused Lewis to lose second place to Max Verstappen. And I think that's where Bottas needs to be a bit more crafty against Lewis, although ultimately today it didn't really benefit him very much. Lewis settled down, he didn't panic, and he roared back. He pounced on Max's error coming out of turn 14, passing him quite bravely actually down the inside of turn 1, because Verstappen's moving across to the inside, making the apex very tight, and it's dusty, it's slippery there. So it was a very, very bold move from Lewis. Then he chased down Bottas. I think within a lap he was within DRS range. And as soon as he had a sniff of an opportunity to get past, he was through like a ferret up a drain pipe. It was a scintillating overtake. So brave, so risky. Think about it this way. If he gets it a few millimetres wrong, it could have handed Red Bull a 1-2 finish, because it could have either wiped both Mercedes out of the race or severely compromised their race moving forward. He got it bang on, and from there he was gone. He set fastest laps and opened up a gap to Bottas, who had absolutely no answer, which I'll come on to in a minute. And in the end, after their pit stops, he had a comfortable gap to Max Verstappen on the hard tyres and was probably the fastest man out on the track in that phase, because let's face it, he wouldn't have been pushing as hard as he could have at that point. Verstappen would have needed to close on him, and I think Hamilton had plenty of pace in hand. Now, I think it's very similar to his 2020 win in Portimao, where Bottas was quick early on but then faded and was then handsomely beaten by Lewis. And this opens up Lewis's championship lead to what some would call a mere 8 points. And you have to think he will be the man to beat again in Spain, where he's won the last 4 races in Catalonia. Now, I say only a mere 8 points, but 8 points at the moment could be massive in the title fight with Max Verstappen moving forwards. And someone who could be well out of the title fight already is Valtteri Bottas. And this is really a race that got away from him. He absolutely should have been able to build a buffer while Verstappen was in P2, because the Mercedes was the faster race car. But once Hamilton and Verstappen too, they got past, there was seemingly nothing that Valtteri could fight back with. And this is becoming a common and actually infuriating theme with Valtteri. Because when you look at the wider context, it's probably one of the reasons why Mercedes have never really given him more than a year or a multi-year deal instead of this rolling 1-year agreement. Because they don't know whether he's going to be bang on it all the way through the year and pushing Lewis, or he's going to be a bit hit and miss like he was this weekend. You know, he could say that it was the tyres, he couldn't get them in the window, and this, that, or the other. But ultimately, we've seen Bottas can be excellent. He's taken some brilliant wins. Think back to his first victory under severe pressure from Sebastian Vettel in Russia in 2017. And he coped with it. But at the moment, he gets into these decent positions and then just the flame flickers out. It's really frustrating. And I know George Russell didn't have a great race today, but what could he actually achieve in that Mercedes? We had a glimpse of it in Sakir. And I think at the moment, the two of them, Russell and Bottas, would be very closely matched. I'm not sure George would necessarily beat Lewis straight away, but he'd learned quite a bit from him. He's got a lot of capacity to expand and to develop. Bottas is about as good as he'll ever be. And you know, he may even already know that his days at Brackley are numbered. But which team would take him on this basis? And in fact, who would have a space for him? Obviously, the obvious choice is to go to Williams, back to Williams, if George moves into the Mercedes seat. But, you know, could they be lining up somebody different? Rumours of Aston Martin if Sebastian Vettel decides to call it a day, but I don't see that happening. It's a big few races coming up for Bottas, because if he falls behind in this fight massively and starts compromising the constructors, his seat might just be in even greater jeopardy than we maybe even realise. Let's flip from the front of the grid to the very back of the grid and talk about one of the Haas drivers. And no, we're not going to talk about, well, we might mention him, but we're going to talk about Mick Schumacher. And let's show some appreciation to Mick Schumacher. Take a bow, young man. 17th on the face of things is probably nothing to go home and shout about. But the mere fact that he was battling with the Williams of Nicholas Latifi and in the process utterly demolishing his teammate, who was lagging a minute behind, and getting in the way of Sergio Perez is something to be applauded. I'll admit, I was not a Michael Schumacher fan, and I find it really weird seeing MSC, and it's almost like a throwback to a nightmare on the timing screens. But obviously Mick is his own person, and he doesn't have perhaps some of the flaws that his father has or had as a driver. So it's much easier for me to appreciate Mick Schumacher, and he was fantastic today for several laps. I think the TV were trying to follow Verstappen versus Bottas and Mick Schumacher versus Latifi at the same time, and handily they were kind of in the same area of the track, so you'd see one and you'd get a glimpse of what was going on with the other. But we witnessed Schumacher challenging Latifi for that position. I don't know whether Nicholas was struggling with anything, but Mick was more than holding his own. And let's not beat around the bush. That Haas is not a great car. It's comfortably the slowest on the grid. And yet he still managed to beat his teammate Nikita Mazepin by 67 seconds in the same machinery when neither driver had a major incident. It's astounding. There was even an early safety car, and Mazepin still ended up more than a minute behind his teammate. Mick is embarrassing Nikita Mazepin. He's pulled his pants down and he's pointing his finger at him and laughing at him, which of course is fantastic because we're not a big fan of Mazepin. I have a little bit of sympathy with him because it must be very difficult to drive a Formula 1 car, but he's actually had more experience than Mick Schumacher, and he's coming out saying that it's more difficult than he imagined, but he's driven the Mercedes, and it's just a rich boy, complaining because he's not getting his own way and he's so used to being spoiled. So chin up Nikita. Back to Mick. He's learnt from his errors in Bahrain and in Imola, those couple of spins, and obviously with the help of his race engineer / life therapist Gary Gannon, they actually put together a really quietly effective race for Haas. He's going to continue learning over every racing mile that he completes this season, and he'll move up the grid. If he continues on that trajectory, he may, depending on how well Carlos Sainz does, he may end up in a Ferrari in a couple of years, but he'll certainly end up in an Alfa Romeo / Sauber or something with a Ferrari power unit in a couple of seasons' time. Ahead of Portimao then, I bigged up the battle, the rekindling of a rivalry between McLaren and Ferrari. And they were the standout performers of the midfield, but actually Alpine were the surprise of the midfield. And they surprised the two teams ahead of them, really, because they looked decent in practice, as they have done in Bahrain and Imola, before under delivering. But in Portimao, however, Ocon and Alonso delivered on the potential of the French machine and grabbed 10 massively important championship points. I think McLaren outscored them, and Ferrari, Leclerc finished 6th. I know they didn't. But that's a step in the right direction for the Enstone-based team. It actually catapults them ahead of AlphaTauri, who really struggled this weekend and were fortunate to score a single point with Pierre Gasly. Of course, McLaren and Ferrari had mixed fortunes with their drivers, Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc showing really strongly with a 5th and 6th place finish respectively as the class of the midfield. Although interestingly, it was actually Carlos Sainz who was the standout performer in qualifying, bagging 5th place for the Scuderia. Lando Norris ended up in, was it 7th or 8th? Might have been 6th. Cannot remember. But not quite as high up as McLaren perhaps hoped. Charles Leclerc was down in 8th, and of course Daniel Ricciardo was down in 16th for McLaren. A bad day for him. Now for Lando, he actually managed to run as high as 4th ahead of Sergio Perez in the early stages after nailing the restart behind the safety car, making up some places over Sainz and, of course, Sergio Perez. But then he dropped back into 5th, and that's where he kind of settled for the rest of the afternoon. He did cover Carlos Sainz's early pit stop and managed the tyre wear better to hold off Charles Leclerc, who benefited from pitting a few laps later. Daniel Ricciardo rescued 9th place to help McLaren edge their lead over Ferrari to 11 points in the Constructors' Championship. A decent save from 16th, where on a track where overtaking can be easy if you're in the right position, but it can be difficult to get there. I think that's a solid effort from Danny Ric. But then if you look at the two lovely blue cars of Alonso and Ocon, they sprang into life. Alonso especially. Martin Brundle on the Sky F1 commentary described him as a little bit anonymous, and all of a sudden there he was, overtaking drivers everywhere you looked. He made mincemeat of Pierre Gasly, of Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo as he motored up to P8. But actually it was Esteban Ocon who had provided the really handy information that Alonso needed. And that was that the hard compound tyre was the tyre to be on. I think Ocon stopped on the same lap as Norris, and so Norris and Sainz went soft medium. Ocon went, I think he went medium hard. Or did he go soft hard? Can't remember what he started on, but he definitely went to the hards, and all of a sudden that little Alpine just went along so nicely. He was stuck. I think he was stuck behind Gasly for a little while, but then he nailed the pass and off he went. And it gave Alpine the information to make sure that they ran along Alonso long, but then still put him on the hard tyres, and the hard tyre would be more than quick enough to help him catch the guys in front of him. And he made some super overtakes, and it's a really decent points finish or double points finish, in fact, for Alpine. And this actually is even more crucial considering that Alfa Romeo were granted right of appeal for the for the 30-second penalty in Imola, which cost them 9th place with Kimi Raikkonen, which then promoted Ocon from 10th to 9th and Alonso from 11th to 10th. So it's really, really important points for Alpine, because they may actually be about to lose a couple through absolutely no fault of their own. That would actually be very harsh, as much as it's a harsh penalty on Kimi to have lost those points. Still, Alpine surprising the midfield pack this weekend, and long may it continue, because that could be a very, very intense battle if Alpine throw themselves into the mix with McLaren and Ferrari moving forward. Okay, so let's move on to a new section of the Five Red Lights race review podcast. In collaboration with Formula One Trends, they have sent me this lovely bit of data comparing Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas's lap times from the Portuguese Grand Prix. I'll leave a link to their Twitter in the description, and I'll pop it up on screen as well, so you can go and check out their data analysis from each race, so that we've got some teammate comparisons, and there has been some qualifying analysis as well. So we're going to dive on in to a teammate performance comparison of Mercedes Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Now, of course, Lewis won the race. Valtteri finished 3rd after they had locked out the front row. So I'm just going to zoom in here on my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see the cursor on the screen. There's a little blue arrow on my screen. So we'll start. The timings start at lap 7, because obviously we had the lap 1 or lap 2 even safety car, and you can see the difference between Bottas and Hamilton immediately the first lap. So Hamilton is the green circles and Bottas is the blue circles. Now the red and the blue lines, the third degree polynomial lines, they just show sort of a moving average of expected lap times, but the actual lap times jump around a little bit. So that shows the trend at which their lap times kind of went. So let's start with the first racing lap, which was lap 7. So Bottas gets the jump on Hamilton, and Hamilton actually loses second position to Max Verstappen. So all of that combined means that Lewis loses somewhere in the region of about a second and a half, well over 1 second. And you can see that Bottas is slightly faster in the first 4 laps, but then he's a touch slower on lap 11, where Hamilton actually has his first lap after actually passes Max Verstappen on that lap. That might be to do with the fact that Lewis had the DRS, and you can see the lap before they were actually both very close. Of course, Hamilton was tucked up behind Verstappen, who was tucked up behind Bottas. And you can see that Hamilton, he kind of is quicker and then he's slower to begin with, but once he gets past Verstappen, and he's running behind Bottas with the DRS, but does have the dirty air through much of the lap, he's still significantly faster. And by significantly, I mean, a few tenths of a second. So if we have a look at the left-hand side, the timings, obviously this is in seconds rather than minutes and then seconds. So 82.5 is around a 1 minute 22. And Hamilton here on about lap 12 is a significant chunk quicker already. Bottas has immediately upped his lap times, but then suddenly they drop back, and Hamilton, again, the lap times drop off a little bit, and in fact Hamilton is slower on lap 13, but I think that would probably be just to do with the dirty air. Hamilton actually falls out of DRS range for a couple of laps before getting back into the DRS, and on lap 20 he makes the move for P1. And you can see here the green dot below the line where it says Hamilton overtakes Bottas for P1. The difference in the lap time is just staggering. Bottas loses well over, I think that's nearly 2 seconds. It's almost 2 seconds Bottas loses being overtaken and then just falling back out of range. Now this is the bit that I was really intrigued to find out about. So you see here Hamilton, he gives the radio message, tyres are shot, and he's at a lap time of about a 1:23, and then immediately all of his lap times are close or around the 1 minute 22 mark, and even dropping towards the 1:21. So in fact they drop to about a 1:22.5 and then drop to a 1:22.0, and he's quicker than Bottas. So you see the red line for Lewis, it crosses over quite early and it never really comes back until they get close to the pit stops. And that's because Bottas had to get a wriggle on to stop Verstappen undercutting him. And they had the luxury of keeping Hamilton out because he'd built about a 4-second lead by that point and was comfortably leading the race. And this is approaching sort of lap 35, lap 36, where Verstappen pitted first. But the tyres are shot message indicates to me that Hamilton is already throwing little decoys out to the pit wall to obviously be aired on the TV, and Red Bull will hear it and think, okay, maybe we should pull Max in early, or we should be guarding against that, or maybe now's the time to push because Hamilton is struggling on his tyres. Just subtle little things like that, just to try and throw his competitors off the scent. And it just shows that he's got so much spare capacity when he's driving the car to think about the bigger picture now. He's not just this out-and-out speedster that he used to be when he first arrived in Formula One. And he's utterly destroying Bottas in the lap times in the second half of the first stint. Bottas just had absolutely no answer. So let's move down to the second graph down here, which is the hard compound stint. Now, again, Hamilton is the green circles, Bottas is the blue circles, and Bottas is told that these tyres are very resilient, you can push it, and Toto gets on the blower again, telling Valtteri that he is the quickest car. And, well, that's kind of correct. He's in the fastest car, i.e. the Mercedes, but he's not actually the fastest driver on the track. Hamilton comes out and is immediately as quick as Valtteri and faster. Now, there's a little exchange here just around that radio message where Bottas and Hamilton trade faster times, but then Bottas does this 21.0 while Hamilton's in the 21.5s, and from there the tyres just sort of give up. He never really gets back down to that level. It takes him a little while. Towards lap 60 he gets back to that level. Hamilton, also sensing perhaps that Bottas is closing, puts in a faster lap time. Again, if you see the lines, the blue line is Bottas, the sort of moving average lap time. It's a fairly steady decline of lap time. It's a straight line, which tells me that he either was managing the tyres too much or he just was at the maximum of his pace capacity. And you'd expect to see a big dip and then it flatten off somewhere in the middle. Something a bit like Hamilton's, although Hamilton's is a bit more of a U shape. It picks back up towards the end, but that's because towards the end of the race he is just backing off. He's conserving the car, and well, he's just in control. Now there is a little note here that the curve is skewed for Bottas because of these two big slow lap times where he's losing power, but it's actually a sensor error on the exhaust, which probably, so you see this little dotted line, which the large variations in lap time make it actually quite a big dipping line. So the blue line is probably just the mean average in that case. But it does tell you that Hamilton very much has the measure of Bottas the whole way through. Every time Bottas puts in a lap time like he does here on lap 45, a couple of laps later, Hamilton has an answer. And of course, Hamilton did have to overtake Sergio Perez for position, which caught him out. He was demanding blue flags, and the team told him that he was actually racing Perez. But he made the pass, and he didn't really lose that much time. His lap times don't jump around quite so wildly. Of course, they jump around a little bit sooner because he hits the back marker traffic. And obviously, then Bottas and Verstappen are more easily let through because they're aware of who's coming through. But it does tell you that Bottas was not really on it on the race day. He was at best as quick as Lewis, but he was not consistently faster than Lewis. You look at all the green dots here, there's several in a line very close together, and then Bottas is sort of flitting over and around them. So for Valtteri, it makes grim reading. He said after the race that he didn't know where his pace was, and well, it's in simple evidence here that he just wasn't fast enough. Why that is, obviously, we don't know, and Mercedes will be getting to the bottom of it. But I think some of it is just pure ability. Bottas, like I've said, is probably about as good as he'll ever be. But with Lewis, he's just constantly growing, constantly improving, and that shows in the lap time data. So there you have it. A little teammate performance comparison of Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Thank you to Formula One Trends for providing me with this and allowing me to use it within my videos. Again, I'll leave a link in the description to their Twitter. Go and check them out. That's all for today. It's a double-header race week, so look out for my Spanish Grand Prix preview, which I'll drop a little bit later this week, and of course my review, which will be out next week. If you're new to the channel, have a look at some of my other content, such as my Imola Drive Crate unboxing and my Driver of the Month video. Thank you to F1 Trends, Shafi of F1 Trends, allowing me to use the data analysis put together there that you've just seen. Go follow him on Twitter at Formula One Trends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you when the 5 red lights go out at the Spanish Grand Prix. Bye for now.